Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my really very special and exciting guest this week. I just feel privileged to have got him because I've been a fan of his for bloody ages. His name's Sean Langan, and he just makes really cool, exciting, manly documentaries in dangerous zones. Sean, tell me, when would I first have come across you? You've been at this game quite a while.
Yes, I'm not sure about manly, because my brother, I think, correctly always described me as Mr. Magoo of the war correspondence.
That's part of the appeal, though. Mr. Magoo goes to hell.
Yeah, and so in fact, my first documentary was in 1998 in Kashmir, and I was writing at that point for Esquire magazine, a freelancer, and the BBC said, "Can you film this trip you're doing?" And I went in search of 5 Western backpackers who'd been kidnapped by Islamic extremists. And it was a forerunner and the taste of what was about to unfold with the whole war on terror, 9/11. But a little-known place, Kashmir, and these insurgents, I knew nothing about Islamist extremism, jihadis, and suddenly I was thrust into this world where these 5 backpackers had been kidnapped. And that was my entree into that world. And I came back and the documentary was a success. And the BBC said, well, you know, we like that, you hanging out with these guys, these mujahideen with long hair, beards, threatening to kill all Americans and Westerners. Why don't you go off to Afghanistan? Because there's this group called the Taliban, who are actually the government at that point. I don't know if that's the right word. Right. And that's how it happened. And I went to Afghanistan before 9/11, and I was wandering around Kabul and Jalalabad, and it was like a campus for terrorists. And I was in Jalalabad. This was 1999, 2000. And at the market, I'd meet an Arab, and my translator would say hello. We met all these people in my hotel, which was near Osama bin Laden's house, Duranta Dam. You would see all the training camps dotted around on the roads, and lots of Arabs, and you'd meet them in the hotel. And I said to my translator, I said, God, what are all these Arabs? Who are they? And he said, well, that guy you met in the bazaar this morning, he's an expert in fertilizer bombs from Islamic Jihad. That guy from Al-Qaeda is an expert in training. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I can't be the only person in the world to think this has got to be a bad idea. And then, of course,
this can't end well.
This can't end well. And it really was like a real campus for terrorists. Yeah. Openly training, coordinating. And of course, 9/11 happened, and then I was the go-to guy for, well, let's send Sean back out to meet these terrorists.
You were a bit like Claire Hollingworth of the Daily Telegraph, seeing the German tanks massing on the border.
That's right, 1939. She was the first, and not a war journalist as well, I think. She,
like you then, not a war journalist.
Thank you. Not an expert.
Sort of a William Booth figure.
Well, so the Mr. Magoo tag, which I know was recently used against the Attorney General in America, John Sessions, isn't it? Why? Right. I think Trump. And I don't know if that was a put down, but I was always a fan. Mr. Magoo, for people who don't know, is this cartoon character from the 50s who's incredibly short-sighted and was always forever walking to the edge of a building or a cliff, but not quite falling over. And an example of that, my first encounter, I was abducted by Islamic terrorists in Kashmir. And this is where ignorance is bliss. I was surrounded by these guys. They were Pakistanis, Arabs, Afghans, and they were shouting at this local translator who had taken me to the middle of nowhere to this village. But I didn't understand what they were saying. And I'm filming it. And all I hear is them yabbering, and I say, oh, is there a problem? And my translator, who was very cool, and that's what you want in stressful situations, he went, no, there's no problem. And then they carried on shouting, but they were always shouting, so I couldn't really tell. And you hear me say, is there anything I could do to help? And he said, no, it's fine. 6 months later in the edit suite, I'm translating with subtitles what was being said. And the first guy, an Afghan with a AK-47, was pointing at me saying, we told you not to bring any foreigners here. We're going to bleep, cut his head off. And then you hear me say, is there a problem? And now I know what he was actually saying. I'm panicking in the edit suite. And my translator says, no, it's fine. And then later on that's when they threatened saying, right, we're going to cut his head off. And that's when you hear me say, is there anything I can do to help?
Was this was the 2008
That was 98, Kashmir.
So you were kidnapped more than once.
Well, no. So I was abducted. Then when this was pre 9/11, when people still liked in that part of the world the BBC. Now they don't. They consider us part of.
Yes, because this is what surprises me. You were wandering around with near impunity
with great ignorance.
Yeah.
And no one knew at this point really I didn't know who the Mujahideen were. And I was amazed. And I do remember it was so chilling with hindsight. One of them, an Arab, came up to the camera and said, "Today Kashmir, tomorrow America," and they all laughed. But these people were all joined Al Qaeda, these groups. And in fact, that group was one of the first to sign up to Al Qaeda. So I was wandering around aimlessly, but so was the rest of the world. So were the experts in the West who should have known better. Right. But one thing interesting, and it's interesting that we're now meeting March, as you pointed out, 2018. So my first documentary, that was March 98, right, looking for these tourists who'd been kidnapped, Western backpackers, who all were eventually killed. One escaped.
Oh, were they?
One was beheaded, but the rest.
Where were they from?
2 Americans. One of the Americans escaped. Young backpackers who'd been picked up. They were hitchhiking in the mountains in Kashmir. It wasn't a big story at the time, but this was really part of a pattern that's become so much part of our world, But I remember 10 years later to that week, which is now the same week as we're talking today, I was kidnapped by the Taliban in the tribal areas of Pakistan. And I remember sitting there in my cell, having had a decade of near misses, covering the wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And I wanted to say for the American audience and British listening, as a journalist, it was the greatest privilege for my career, spending so much time with young American British soldiers side by side. And it was quite an amazing experience. But I paid a price, and I was then kidnapped 10 years after my first documentary.
I think we should go into more detail about the kidnapping experience, which must have been pretty traumatic, in the second segment of this.
Yeah.
But so you were wondering. It's extraordinary, isn't it? You were very privileged in a way to be able to look at these people, see them, observe them up close, but not get killed.
Yes.
That was quite a narrow window when a Western journalist could do that. You wouldn't do it now.
I don't think you couldn't do it now.
Apart from that German guy who went into Raqqa, who was invited by ISIS.
And I saw that, and it was, you had a sense at any moment he could be killed.
That was insane, wasn't it?
And his translator driving him around, the ISIS, was Jihadi John, who'd beheaded one of my best friends, Jim Foley. I lived with him in London.
I didn't know that.
Who was beheaded, yeah. And you see Jihadi John on camera driving that German guy around. So that's how chilling it is. And I wouldn't want to... That, to me, was the line when... And it was interesting to me, interesting is the right word, because I felt physical revulsion. When ISIS, when they killed Jim Foley and others, these were Westerners doing this. It was the Westerners, the Beatles they were called by the prisoners. They were all born and bred in, they lived in London. They weren't born and bred here. And somehow that seemed to me, that was even a step beyond what, it's a bit like cancer spreading from the early days, the way they treated their prisoners. The Taliban wouldn't have done that to prisoners. They may have killed you, but not tortured.
Well, also, isn't there some kind of weird hospitality tradition in Pashto culture?
Yes. My captors always referred to me as their guest.
Did they?
And there was this bizarre...
Welcome, Mr. Langan.
It was like, you're our guest, and can we get you anything? And my running joke was, you could let me go. Oh no, apart from that, what can we get you?
Yeah.
So I was their guest, but the food wasn't great, and they kill guests.
So you sort of fell into this stupid, almost suicidal career by accident. Really.
It really was by accident. But I woke up one morning in Kashmir. I'd been a journalist for 10 years and found my calling. I woke up truly happy. I had a clear goal in life. At that point was to find these Western tourists, the hostages. I was looking for their kidnappers.
So you didn't find them, obviously.
I got to the group that captured them. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
And did you meet any of the ones who were involved in the?
So I travelled into the mountains on my own, deep into territory. Car broke down. I had a 4-day journey walk to go and meet And there was only 2 of the original kidnap groups still alive because they'd been killed by Indian Army in fighting. And about half an hour before I went to meet one of the kidnappers, he was killed by an Indian armed special forces assault. So I was pulled out by the BBC. In a way, that initial ignorance was a great benefit with hindsight, because when I was talking to, and it was Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, they really got a sense that this person can't possibly be a threat.
Right. Yes.
He's too bumbling, and I noticed as time went on, when I got to know things, they start becoming more suspicious. So when I got to know about, and I asked them questions about tactics, or I actually knew what a gun was at that point. I could tell the difference between an AK-47 and a PK. I realized actually it was harder for me to bond and to understand their point of view and get in with them because I was less bumbling.
Yes. And did you start to pick up any languages of any of the places you went
a little bit, but I regret not learning. I started learning Arabic and a bit of Pashto, but when you're in the middle of a story and you're filming, you've got so much going on.
Yes.
I would always rely on my translators.
Can one make any money out of this? Did you make any money out of this?
So for a while, before the media collapsed, we're like miners now, aren't we?
Yeah.
But because war wasn't going out, it still isn't going out of fashion. And so I was one of the few who was actually getting interviews with the other side, terrorists, in Iraq or Afghanistan. So for a while, I made, I would have made more interviewing David Beckham or Kim Kardashian.
You say that, actually, well.
I suspect if I'd made documentaries on Kim Kardashian's
maybe
something or another, and David Beckham, I would have made more money.
They were different times. We could all earn a living then.
I made a living.
Yeah.
I made a living risking, but the trouble was, it's a bit like they say NASCAR and Formula One, 30% of the audience tune into that. They used to, hoping to see a crash.
Yes.
And my documentaries, I like to think they were serious investigations into these important foreign policy war.
Yeah.
But also there was an element of, oh my God, is he or isn't he going to get blown up or killed?
Yes, well, of course. I mean, there has to be.
And I think the commissioning process was part of that. They kept upping the ante. You didn't get shot that time. You didn't get,
But this, I imagine, was this in the days before risk assessment forms and stuff?
Well, the risk assessment, because of course no one's listening to this, I would lie on my risk assessment forms because I had to fill in these risk assessment forms. So I'd be going into, say, Iraq to interview the Islamic fighters, or Afghanistan to interview the Taliban. You couldn't put that on a risk assessment form. So I would say, I'm going to Kabul and I'm going to go in a UN convoy to an American compound.
Right.
And then, of course, when I went there, I would go in the boot of a car to go and interview the Taliban.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have got insurance. But so when I got kidnapped, that was it. They reviewed all those risk assessment forms I'd been filling in, fake news was the way I used to fill them in. So it was difficult. I don't think I'd get insurance now.
No. And so you went to Iraq as well?
Yeah, I was. Again, it was just after Bush's appearance on the warship with the banner, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
And I was
that
getting...
was a lie.
Well, there you go. And I was getting calls from hang on, the war's not over. You want to... From these Arab contacts I had, all of whom were in London, by the way. When I say I was getting these calls, you never had... London was the place... It was a perfect place because before 9/11, you'd go to West London to meet Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda. Yeah. They're all in London. And these people in London were calling me and saying, you want to go to Iraq, you should go to the Al-Anbar province, Fallujah, Ramadi, because the war's just beginning. And I couldn't get a commission. Here's the thing about the media. I rang the head of BBC News, CNN, and I said, look, this thing about the statue coming down, Saddam's statue, and they spent millions covering that invasion. And I was like, no, the war hasn't started yet. And I remember someone high up in news said to me, Sean, Baghdad, been there, done that. That was 2003. So I paid for my own flight and then went to Fallujah and Ramadi and got the first interviews with the Islamic, the resistance. And it was just at that, when you talk about a window, I was filming in Fallujah and nearly died a few times, but within weeks, that's when they killed those American contractors and strung their body
So
up.
you say you nearly died a few times. What happened? I mean, what?
Well, I'm just saying, though, but it was pretty risky at that point.
Right.
But it would have been
Oh, I see.
beyond
Yes, well, quite.
weeks later. There was a point where I was in Fallujah or Ramadi filming a demonstration against the Americans. The Americans in their Bradley vehicles pulled out, and suddenly the demonstrators had nowhere to turn, and they turned on and I realized what you do is you keep filming. So this mob, and I noticed I'm looking through the camera at this mob who was shouting death to America and death to Britain. There were a lot of people with knives and grenades. And someone told me the best advice is you go up to the toughest looking guy in a crowd, because the most dangerous thing is a mob, not an individual with a weapon, because a mob is like this baying for blood.
Yeah.
And so I went right up to the toughest guy, pulled out a grenade, and said, "I'm ready to die for Islam." And he put his finger in the pin of the grenade. And I don't think he was intending to pull, but he's surrounded by people jumping up and down. So you see my hand come over the camera, and I'm holding the grenade, saying, "It's okay, I trust you. I'm not ready to die for Jesus." But by talking to him, none of the others were going to kick off. And then when I turned the camera away, I stopped filming. That's when the mob turned on me, and they chased me into a shop. And I was surrounded by about 900 sweating, hot, angry, young Iraqi men with knives and grenades. But those guys I'd interviewed in the crowd were part of the local resistance, and they came in and got me out and into a car. So that day, my life was saved by...
Were these Mahdi army? This
No, this was very much Sunni. Yeah,
Sunni.
this was real Sunni. Fallujah was the crucible for ISIS out of Al-Anbar province, where all of Saddam's Ba'athist generals used to live, fighters. It's the real Sunni stronghold, and that's where ISIS came out of.
So you must have quite strong and informed views on where the Allies went wrong in creating ISIS. What were their fundamental mistakes? Was it the debuffcation?
Yeah, I mean, where we were, it's hard, and I'd like to say as well. I think one thing I've noticed. We're sitting here on this sofa, talking for Breitbart. I've worked for the BBC, The Guardian, and I've noticed though, the closer you get to the front lines, the less difference there are amongst. When I was with British and American soldiers, I remember this really good friend of mine. He was talking about the Communist News Network. He was from Tennessee, Special Forces, Marine. And I went, "Wow, that's what you call CNN. What do you call the BBC?" And he spat out his tobacco. He said, "The Bolshevik Broadcasting Corporation." And we became really good friends. And you see things really clearly on the front line. And the military had this old acronym, REMFS, Rear Echelon.
Motherfuckers,
yeah. And it's the same with the media. So I just thought I'd say that now before, because the further you come back here, whether it's New York, DC, or London, it's very politicized now. And whereas when you're on the front line, you see things clearly. So it's not. But where it went wrong, oh my God. So in Iraq, I was at that meeting when Paul Bremer, the head of the civil, it was a sort of CPU. It was called the civilians running Iraq, the Americans running it, disbanded the army, made something like how many millions unemployed overnight, all with weapons.
That's a good idea.
Debathification was, in Iraq, to be a school teacher or to a doctor, the head of your unit, you had to join the Ba'ath Party. So to get rid of every Ba'ath member was you got rid of all the civil servants, people running the electricity, water. Even when he said it, I'm this, remember, Mr. Magoo, clueless guy. I'm sitting in this meeting going, that's got to be a bad idea.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say history has shown it wasn't a good idea. I mean, literally, I remember within weeks, the water wasn't working in a part of Iraq and in Baghdad where I was, nor the electricity, because the guy at the plant had been sacked because he was a Ba'ath member. Right. But, he was the engineer running the electricity plant. So that was a bad idea. Various things, I think I've gone off politicians of all shades. It was such an eye-opener, because my first job as a foreign journalist was covering the collapse of communism. I'm that old. So I remember seeing the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And it seems to me so shocking since then, where in the Cold War there was a real full spectrum of experts, civilians, military, thinking strategically, and And then since then, it's like we're making it up as we go along.
Yeah.
Foreign policy. And sitting here today in London, after all the years of attacks we've had in London, I remember that mantra that Bush and Blair and others were saying at the time, we're fighting them over there so we don't have to fight them here. And of course, ISIS listened to that very carefully and thought, right, well, and so now we are fighting them over here.
Yes.
So a lot's gone. It's hard to see. And another quote in Afghanistan, great American commander talked to me. He said, all we're doing here in Afghanistan is mowing the lawn, because the real seeds of this insurgency are being sown in Pakistan. We're living in it's like an Alice in Wonderland bad dream. Our allies in the war on terror, Pakistan, bankroll the Taliban, the safe havens they provide. The reason why I was kidnapped, I went to the tribal areas of Pakistan, because everyone knows in Afghanistan, all the Americans, the British fighting there, that all the insurgents, we can't defeat them because they just cross the border and they've got training camps and facilities and hospitals and the logistics, the Pakistan Secret Service, ISI and the army, they're looking after them. But they're our ally in the war on terror, and we give them, America was until recently giving them $10 billion. So we're actually paying the guys who kill them. Our other great ally in the war on terror is Saudi Arabia.
It's crazy times.
Crazy
times. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and I have to say, really, really exciting and interesting guest, Sean Langan. More in a moment.
Hey folks, I want to tell you about Breitbart News' Second Amendment newsletter, Downrange with A.W.R. Hawkins. Features the top gun stories of the week, every week, and guest columnists like Gun Owners of America's Larry Pratt or Armed American Radio's Mark Walters. Also features a review of a firearm or a firearm accessory each week. The newsletter downloads on Thursday, comes right to your email inbox. You can subscribe at Breitbart.com/AWR.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very exciting, brave Mr. Magoo guest, Sean Langan. Sean, I think we've got to, in this section, tell the story of what it's like being captured by the Taliban and under constant threat of being beheaded. Is it fun?
Yeah.
Can you recommend?
Yeah. I don't know the short answer to that.
Yeah.
No is the short answer. Is it fun?
Okay.
But at the same time, I don't regret the experience.
You really don't.
Bizarre as though it sounds, and it is, as you reminded me before we sat down, it's 10 years to this week that I was kidnapped. So I wouldn't want to go through that experience ever again. And in fact, if I thought it was likely, I would shoot the person trying to kidnap me. Failing that, I'd shoot myself rather than go through it again.
Could you have done in this situation? Do you think? I mean,
that came potentially, but what I'm saying is, at the same time, even though I would shoot myself rather than go through it again, I don't regret it because it was the greatest lesson in life. Because it sounds a weird thing to say. When you know you're going to die, and I'll explain when that isn't a sort of phrase. The one point I was told, you're going to be executed, and I was given I was given a hot shower, a fresh pair of shalwal kameez, and I was brought out into the courtyard to be executed. You see life so clearly, and it's a bit. This is a bit. The irony is, it's a bit like a bad Monty Python sketch, because the last gift of life before death takes you out to cut your throat is you're given insight and wisdom into your whole life. I could see my life from the age of 5. My first day at infant school, the name of my teacher, the first day I met my wife, the first day I met my best friends, and you see where your life went wrong. It's quite amazing. It's a combination of a person drowning, they say of Drowning Man, when they see your whole life, of Scrooge, Christmas Carol, when the ghost of the Christmas past. And it was quite amazing seeing everything in my life, because the brain, apparently, according to this psychologist, their thinking is the brain knows the body's in a life or death situation. It's like a car crash. So it just gives the body everything it needs to survive, and that floods your brain with cortisol, adrenaline, and gives you total memory. And they think the reason is there might be something deep in your memory that's going to help you get through this. Wow. And it's quite amazing. So in fact, and here's the Monty Python element, the secret of life, and it's so pathetic, is your granny was right when she said eat up all your leftovers because there are poor people in Africa who are hungry, and you just think, whatever. But you realize, oh my God, that shit's true. But it's so true, and you realize, God, the only thing that really counts are family, friends. What was I doing going off and worrying about life would be better with a Mercedes, which doesn't make sense when you're back home. So that was an incredible lesson. But on the day-to-day, it was hell.
So just to give us the countdown, tell us what happened exactly.
Yeah. So most abductions start with a classic scene of someone being bundled into, abducted on a side of a road, hood over their head, bundled into the back of a boot of a car. Mine was different because that's how I always used to go to meet the Taliban. For security reasons, I'd be blindfolded, a hood over the head, not always in the boot, but in the back of cars. And this was quite similar. And I had been invited by the Taliban, negotiated with them 6 months to go into the tribal areas. So I crossed the border from Afghanistan to film secret training camps. But when I tell you what I was doing, it was never really a TV proposal, more of a suicide letter. The proposal was to cross the border illegally, film inside secret training camps where they trained fighters, also perhaps meet Al-Qaeda facilitators who trained people to come back to London. So that was never going to work, but that was the plan. And in fact, so they kept up this pretense. So I got into the mountains in the middle of nowhere. Now again, of talk of our great ally, the war on terror, when you're in the tribal areas, I at one point peeped underneath this hood I had on and looked into this village where we stopped for tea. It was just open. It looked like after the Jalalabad I described 10 years before, before 9/11. All these terrorists walking around openly, Afghan Arabs, armed to the teeth. And it's like, oh my God, they've just shifted a few miles further west across the border. That's all we've done, and they haven't gone away. And then I was taken into a farmhouse, put in a room, which was, I think, before I'd got in there, the previous guests had been goats. It was like a small room, basically a cell. And the guy said, "Do you have he spoke in pidgin English, he said, ensuite bathroom." And I peer into the darkness, and I said, "Where?" Thinking ensuite means there's a little separate bathroom. And he pointed a hole in the ground. So my ensuite was the hole in the ground. And they boarded up the windows so we couldn't see of the women in the courtyard. So I was in darkness, and there was a bit of light. And I knew... So for 3 days, they said, "Don't worry, you'll be doing filming. You're going to meet the head of the Haqqani network, and you interview him." But after 3 days, they stopped with the pretense, and they handed a letter saying you're now being charged with working for enemy foreign governments. And I went to my translator, "Oh shit, we've been kidnapped." He looked at me like, "No, we're dead," because they said we're spies.
So your translator said we're dead.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
because when the Taliban say you're a spy, they kill spies.
Yeah.
So, and that was it. I spent 10 years being shot at with American soldiers and British. I stepped on a mine in Fallujah that didn't go off, but it never seemed real. There was a few contacts which were so close where I understood the meaning of bite the dirt. You're trying to get an inch lower into the ground, so the bullets. But when these guys said, "You've been kidnapped," death was like a physical, and I'm going to do what you said I shouldn't do, where you feel a punch on your chest, and that's like death. I realized this was no longer fancy. I'm more likely to be killed. And at the beginning, the Taliban had told the farmers whose house it was, who were part of the Taliban, "We're unbelievers, so we're dirty and we're spies." So they would literally, like the movies, throw the food on the ground, spit at us. And over time, I'd read, now this is where your memory, this cortisol, adrenaline, everything you need in life, you can draw on from inside you. So what kept me going, my translator went mad. He lost, because going back to Mr. Magoo, in captivity, when you're told you've been kidnapped, my Western naivety, ignorance that it's hard to cut another man's throat, made me less... It made it easier for me to believe I could get through this. They're not really going to cut my throat.
Right.
My hope and faith in humanity But the Afghan, my translator, who's far more realistic, was like, no, these people kill people all the time.
Yeah.
Not having that Mr. Magoo faith in humanity and ignorance, he went mad because he thought, we're never going to get out of here. He knew it. I had that faith. Now, but also what kept me going, I had a little beam of light. There was a little hole. And every morning I would sit there and I could just see this apricot tree. And I would go back into childhood memories of holidays in the south of France or Portugal. My mother's got a house in Portugal. The memories of swimming, being with my friends and family were so powerful. Here's the weird thing without getting too serious about it. When you're locked in darkness for 4 months, cut off from the outside world, I've never felt so connected to my loved ones and to my friends. I could feel them. And every day at 6 p.m., I would kneel by my bed in darkness because I knew the time in London. I'd work out the time that was the time when my children, aged 3 and 4, were being bathed, bath time. So I would kneel by the bed and feel their hands, their bodies, their limbs between. I could feel the contours of their limbs beneath my hands, and I would bathe them when they were being bathed. My lowest point was I missed my Gabriel's birthday. My little son was 3. And he became 4 when I was in captivity. Here's the strange thing about life. So I named him Gabriel because it's a nice name. He's turning 4. I'm in captivity. The Taliban. This was the turning point in my captivity. At that point, our captors, the villagers, thought we were dirty spies. So the Taliban came in, the commander, and asked the name of my children. They were interrogating us. And one of the things they wanted was the name. I said, I can't give you the names of my children. Great respect to Pashtun culture. I understand, but I wouldn't ask you the name of your wife. I don't think their names belong into this sort of world. And so he put a gun to my head, and he said, "You've got to tell me the name of your children. I've been ordered. If you don't tell me the names, I've got to kill you." And for some reason, I'm not a brave man. You were saying I just was blustering my whole life. For some reason, in total calmness, I was like not going to give him the names of my children. So I said, "I'm really sorry," being very English. "I don't mean to be rude. You're going to have to kill me." Yeah. So they turned the gun on my translator, who started crying. So I said, "All right, I'll tell you the name of my son. He's called Gabriel, as in the Archangel Gabriel who brought down the Quran to Muhammad," because that's what they believe. And all the people in this room with the guards started crying. And the Taliban lost faith. It was kind of a tricky because basically they realized, oh my God, this guy who's they're saying is an unbeliever, dirty, he's just been prepared to die, not to give up the name of his child. And his son is called, in Quran, it's one of the holiest names, Gabriel, because the Archangel Gabriel in the Quran brings down the book to Muhammad. At that point, the family started feeding us better, didn't believe the Taliban, and allowed me to make a phone call to Channel 4. So it was amazing. But also, anyway, so that was the hardest day because I remembered Gabriel, that he would go to bed that night thinking, why hasn't Daddy called me? Maybe he doesn't love me. And when I met him 4 months later, I got to Heathrow Airport, the doors opened, he came up, he went, Daddy, I'm 4. So he'd been thinking about it.
Wow.
Strange days.
Isn't that, do you ever sort of, I mean, the weirdness of that is like, what made you call him Gabriel in the first place? And was it, I don't know, I mean,
so
you must have thought about this a lot.
Well, so I think what it is, and we live in this world where we're connected with social media.
Yeah.
I've noticed, coming here today, I was on a bus, all the young people sitting together, but none of them were talking to each other. They're all glued to their screens. So we're disconnected from each other. I was cut off, but I could feel and sense what my friends and loved ones were thinking and feeling. I'll give an example, and I just so you know the context, anyone listening to this, I wasn't someone beforehand who goes to yoga or spiritualism or looks at crystal healing. I'm a pretty old-fashioned, unreconstructed, alpha old war correspondent. So I'm lying on my bed, being able to view my life as though it's just like I could flick through it and pause at any time. So I'm remembering age 7, playing in the school hall, the recorder. We just have to play the hymns, when we were 7. The girl sitting next to me who played recorder was called Alison Priestley. And I'm thinking, God, I wonder whatever happened to her. And if I, by some miracle, if I get out of here, I mean, this is like 40 years after, I'm thinking, I'm going to call her up. And I start laughing, because you have to do this thing to pass time, otherwise you're sitting in this cell. So you let your mind wander. And I thought, it's going to be slightly embarrassing, because I want to call her and say, look, you don't know who I am, but 40 years ago I sat next to you playing recorder, and I just wanted to wonder how your life had turned out, because I nearly died, but I didn't. The day I got released, and there'd been a news blackout, so it wasn't in the media. When I got released, my brother got a call, and this woman said, look, this is rather embarrassing. My name's Alison Priestley, and I've just read your brother was released. I used to play recorder. So, weird stuff happens.
Goodness.
And my only thought is, I've thought about it, is when you feel and you're feeling that close to people, that perhaps I don't know what it was, coincidence, call it what you want, but I had a very strong sense that we can connect to our loved ones.
Wow. That section was so special. I'm not going to taint it with we're going to ask questions in the next section. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and now very moving guest, Sean Langan. More in a moment.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
No matter what the story of the day is, I'm going to make sure that we talk about these issues. I am going to make sure that when apologies are necessary, we're going to be there with a camera and with a spotlight. Somebody on this side of the aisle is there to say the movement, it was wrong. There are valid things that are happening in your city that actually need our attention.
Sonny's Corner, Saturday at 1 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125. This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest. I'm now moving on the pace because we've got to go and we've got dinner.
Yeah.
Which people are going to be envious. Our special listener is going to be envious because we've got Toby Young. The dinner is in honour of Toby Young. We've got Douglas Murray, Sarah Vine, you, me,
yourself.
It's going to be a who's who of
what?
I don't know.
Because as the token liberal, I remember when Toby was being mauled and trolled by social media and the media.
Yeah.
I got a call from a newspaper saying, "Oh, we hear you're a friend of Toby Young," and I'm like, "Wow, that's sort of that was a sort of."
Did they imply it was like a bad thing?
I think so. Well, but I luckily, and so here I am today. Friend of Toby Young, guest on Breitbart. So I'm playing with career suicide here with the Guardian, the BBC.
Our careers are over anyway, mate. The glory days are over. Can I just ask you something that I don't think you've ever been asked before? Mosquitoes. How did you deal with those and having a shit and stuff in captivity?
So interesting. I am a real softie, so hate sort of really hot. The reason why I loved Afghanistan, so I'm more worried about mosquitoes and bugs
and scorpions
than I am guns and bullets.
Yeah,
I loved Afghanistan because it's high altitude, so no mosquitoes.
Good.
So no problem about it. The bombs. The scorpion. Interesting one that because in the cell in the early months, because high altitude mountains, it was snow and cold. By June it was baking hot.
Right.
And I'm lying on my bed, and there's the ceiling of the cell. It's like wood and straw. I could hear scurrying around of creepy crawlies, and I'm lying in bed. This is where you become too close to death. That it's part of your daily existence because I'm normally really scared of stuff. And I hear this scratching, and I think, is it a rat? Or maybe it's a snake, and it's right above my head. And suddenly, and I've just got a thin sheet over my body, this thing drops out of the ceiling and lands plonk on my chest, and it's a black scorpion. Yep. And I'm not exaggerating, about 6 or 7 inches big, and its tail is pointing at me. And I'm looking at this black scorpion a few inches from my face. I'm thinking, God, are you having a laugh? Because I'm already kidnapped. These bloody guys are threatening to cut my head off, and now I've got a 7 foot. That's an exaggeration. A 6 inch scorpion. Yeah. I started laughing, thinking someone's having a laugh, and I luckily just flicked it off and then squashed it. And then I had a panic. The next day, the Taliban came in. Now, don't worry about that. They're not lethal. The little ones are the deadly ones. Right. So I don't like mosquitoes. So chose my war zones.
You did. Well done.
Yeah.
Mate.
Iraq. I remember thinking it's bloody, why can't we start a war in Bahamas? In the 1970s, war correspondents were covering Nicaragua, El Salvador.
Yeah.
Beautiful beaches. I mean, there were mosquitoes.
And
but there were
Vietnam, of
cocktails.
course.
Vietnam.
Fantastic beaches.
All had alcohol. Women weren't covered in burqas. All the wars I've covered have been in dry, literally dry, metaphorically dry, no alcohol. You're not going to hang out with people not in your own gender. I was thinking, God, we missed out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm a bit. I'm more worried about snakes and things than I am bullets.
And what about taking shits? I mean,
So I had the ensuite bathroom the Taliban promised me turn out to be a shithole.
yeah.
And then they came in and put these breeze blocks around for some privacy, because me and my cellmate, we were having to squat in front of each other. Now, it's hard enough, but for an Afghan, it's really difficult. We coming from Western culture, where we play sports as kids, you're always in changing rooms.
Yeah.
So it's quite difficult. But you get used to it. So the shower, by the way, was a bucket, and they'd fill it up with water. So you would. But I'd stolen, if that's the right word, a little bar of soap from the hotel I'd been in Dubai on the way to Afghanistan. Little luxuries like that help you survive. It after about 3 months, it got, and I used to because they gave me some really cheap, rough Pakistani shampoo and soap, but to remind me to keep the strength going. You have childhood memories, friends. I had this little bar of soap, which was nice, French soap. I dropped it down the shithole.
No.
And I realized at that point, I was like, oh my God, I need that to survive. That your sanity and your strength is on a thread. So I looked at Sammy, who was called my cellmate, and I shrugged. And he looked at me, but he knew why I was doing it. I got on the ground, and sorry to just keep the story short, put my arm down into the hole, which is, shithole, and got the soap, cleaned it. And my cellmate knew exactly what I was doing, because, of course, I could then wash off my hands, but that soap was necessary.
Yeah.
So you do things like that. Little things like that help you survive.
And I suppose, was there enough water to wet your bottom and stuff?
So I learned how, fun enough, I've never learnt the Arab way of going to the toilet.
No.
Seen it, you go to the toilet, but I'd always carried little tissues with me.
Yes.
Like all journalists in that part of the world. But suddenly there was no, because I always had a bit of toilet paper when I travelled in my rucksack, but I used up. I didn't think I was going to be kidnapped, so I didn't bring 10 weeks or whatever. So I had to learn how to do it. It's quite an art form, because it's counterintuitive, you having to do it. But anyway, yeah.
Well, you use your left hand.
You use your left hand, but you don't go from behind like you would with toilet paper. You go through the front.
Okay.
I don't know how interested
No,
you are.
well, I think that,
But if you find yourself in that situation and you're squatting,
Yeah.
if you would normally your hand goes behind to wipe your behind,
Yeah.
won't work, because the water, you can't pour water from behind. So you put water in your hand and
Yeah.
you scoop from through the front.
I think this is interesting.
Yeah.
And
Practical lessons.
So did you get kind of sores or
So here's the thing about our practical lessons. Not that you ever want to be in this situation. Time can kill you. So my cellmate was scrawled like that, the nail, like you see in the movies where they mark off the days and then put the week through it.
Yeah.
Well, that therein lies madness, because you don't know when time you're literally in purgatory, whether you don't know at the end of it you're going to be killed or not. So to get through it, and I'd read a book at some airport, some special forces soldiers' account, and that's where suddenly having total recall over life was very handy. That I'd read somewhere that you need to break time down into routine. Keeping clean is one of them.
Right.
So I would, in the morning, and now I smoke, heavy smoker, never do any exercise, but I was there doing 100 press-ups a day, and I broke it down into routine, so you don't get bored, but to keep the body going. I would do press-ups in the morning, stretches, have a shower, wash my clothes. My cellmate, who didn't exercise, didn't wash, his body went down psychologically and physically just within. It's amazing how quickly you can collapse. He started bleeding from the internal bleeding. I was also winning over my captors slowly. And I read again that you have to slowly win them over by showing your humanity. It's much harder. I'd read this. Much harder to kill a fellow human being than just a label, dirty Westerner, dirty foreigner. So I started to show them in every day, small ways, how I was not dissimilar to them. And once I'd gained there, at that time when I told them about my son Gabriel and I was prepared to die, I then started asking for better food, vegetables, because there were no fruit vegetables up there in the mountains, and I had malnutrition. I lost 5 teeth. But then the women, hearing these stories from their husbands about this, I started singing for my supper, literally telling them stories. They're fascinating. Here's the weird thing. I've met very few fundamentalists. I met a lot of so-called terrorists and fighters, but they've got this love-hate relationship with the West. So I was telling them stories about the London Underground, New York, and they would tell the stories to their wives. The next morning, I'd be getting really good food, honey or things. So I don't know how much time we've got, but I'll tell you that to the time of my execution.
Oh, yes.
It's always a good point to end, I guess.
Yeah.
The end was going back to Mr. Magoo comedy. I was fully resigned to death at this point and totally at ease because I'd been given the secret of life, that, and I was in love with my family, full of regret, but my only sadness was, and it was a beyond sadness, was the thought that those I'd left behind, my children mainly, would be suffering as a result of my death. But I myself had led a good life, contented. That was the only thing that haunted me. So the Taliban said, my execution was planned for the next day. That morning they came in, they'd heated the water for a hot shower, and I came out into the light like a mole blinking after hibernation, and I was blinded by the sunlight in the Hindu Kush. This beautiful, high altitude, ultra blue sky, and I couldn't see for a few minutes. And I'm looking down at my skin, and it looks like parchment paper stretched over bone and covered in flea bites. Going back to your medical. And I did have dysentery and fever, I think, from all the bites, the mites. That was the worst thing, was there weren't mosquitoes, there were bed bugs.
Okay.
Got eaten alive. And I'm looking at I look like pockmarked. But I'm completely happy just seeing how beautiful. This is the thing about the last lesson of life. It's very hard to retain this sense when you're back at home with problems. But those problems are meaningless when you're in the high altitude looking up. And you can see, because it's so high up, it's only a few miles to the stratosphere. It's I think 12 or 13 miles. And you could see that line between the Earth's atmosphere and the space, the darkness. And you realize that fragility, the exquisite joy and fragility of life. So I was overcome by happiness. So I'm completely, beatifically relaxed about my imminent execution. And there they are. The Taliban don't like to admit they're just thugs. So they have this mock jury. There's 4 mullahs there and an executioner with a big knife. And Mr. Magoo, looking up at the beauty of this sky, how fragile and exquisite the thin sky is, like life. And I say, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your little proceeding. Do you mind if I ask a question? And I'm having to go via my translator, who's not all there.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I'm terribly sorry. I've got a slight problem having my throat cut. I've got a thing with knives, if you don't mind. Any chance you can shoot me in the back of the head? And this is what it's like a Monty Python sketch, when the mullah went, oh, all right. And they literally went to this, in a huddle in the little courtyard, men with flowing beards, started discussing whether as a guest, I should be allowed this last request. And they turned around and said, okay, we will allow you to be shot. I mean, that's really kind of you. I hope you don't mind, but one other request. Do you mind very much if that man over there shoots me? Now, this man had been bringing me food, and I quite liked him. And now, with hindsight, some Americans who debriefed me were saying this was probably your subconscious trying to survive. But I actually was thinking at that moment, he was quite nice. If anyone's going to shoot you, it's what's frightening. It's like a mugging, is the aggression, the violence. If it's a friend pulling your life out, you're out of misery, it's not an unpleasant experience. It's not frightening. And I thought, we might as well have that guy. Yeah. He was so touched that I pointed him to be my executioner. He started crying. And so they cancelled it for that day. Now, I don't know if it turned out that it started out as a mock execution or a real one. But it ended in this scene where he's crying. I go back in. 2 days later, they come in and say, oh, your TV company started negotiations.
just give me the scene where you finally get back home to your family.
Well, there was the negotiations. Just very. I don't know how much time we got there. There was now one thing that can kill you is your hopes raised.
Yeah.
Because when they dashed, it's just so destroying. So my hopes were raised when I heard those negotiations. Then the Taliban come in and say, "There's a problem with negotiations. Here's a sat phone. Call Channel 4 and say we're going to kill your translator unless they pay the ransom." And then he said to me, "But don't worry, we don't really kill him. We always say that's just part of our negotiating." I went, "Oh, no problem." And I go out again into the sunlight with my set. He said, "Look, I've only put $50 pay-as-you-go credit, so try not to take too long." And the only number I knew was the switchboard of this TV company. And I called, again, Mr. McGirt said, "I'm really a bit of an odd one, this. My name is Sean Langan. I work for Channel 4 and I've been kidnapped. I'm in the tribal areas." Thinking immediately, she said, "Of course you know who." She went, there was this pause, she went, "How do you spell Sean Langan?" And I went, S-E-A, and I was like, "Hurry up, I got $50 here, I'm about to be killed." I said, "Look, can you put me through to the head of news?" She goes, "Putting you through, put me on hold." And he went, and I'm again via translator having to try and explain what voicemail means. And I could hear him passionately go, blah, 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 voicemail. And he ratcheted back the gun and said, and I'm sorry I have to use bad language, "Don't these fuckers get it? We kill people just to prove we're serious. Get back on the call, and if you don't speak to the head of news, we're killing him." And I call switchboard, and it's the same woman. I said, "Look, I don't mean to freak you out, but they are now seriously going to kill my translator. You've got to put me through." And I get through to voicemail again. And he shoots in the air. And I look down, I think he shot my translator, and he hasn't. But he said, "Someone must want you killed." Found out later that was some security guy saying, "Look, don't put him through, because then they'll threaten to cut off a finger unless you offer more." So there's some few ups and downs. But then a few weeks later, I'm bundled out of the back of a car with a hood over my head. And there's this big, I don't think he'll mind me, well, I won't say fat, overweight American old guy who hands me a Dunkin' Donut coffee and says, "Welcome home, sir." And I start crying because somehow and he was a guy who was former FBI hostage negotiator, now private. We're now good friends, funny enough. And I was put on a plane. First thing I see is there's the sliding doors at Heathrow open. Is my little Gabriel, my angel Gabriel, who comes up to me and says, "Daddy, I'm 4." And that was it.
Wow, that's a good ending. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Sean Langan.